Hi everyone, welcome to Beyond Boba, a brand new podcast where we aim to dispel myths about the Asian community and burst our own bubbles. My name is Evelyn.
My name is Shreya, and our podcast is called Beyond Boba in order to go beyond boba liberalism and performative activism by just having some honest conversations, sharing our own experiences. And this is a safe space, so all gender identities, like all sexualities, everybody, you're welcome. And I hope that you can identify with a little bit of what we have to say.
Yeah, amazing. And today, for our first episode, we will be discussing Asian beauty standards and our experiences with dating. Just to start, I guess, what kinds of beauty standards did you grow up with, and how does this clash with maybe Western standards?
Yeah, so surprisingly, even though I grew up in the Bay Area at a school which was almost 80% Asian, both South Asian and East Asian, the popular standard for beauty remained to be like white culture, and that was really represented not only in like the social culture of the high school, where people who adopted Western traditions and like Western beauty standards were rewarded for it, but also there was also sort of like a culture around of shame around continuing to be like very traditional, or people seem to be embarrassed about their own traditional beauty. Like, if my mom picked me up in a salwar kameez, like, I guess people might like look at me a little bit strangely, or like, I don't know if I would have felt comfortable at that age, like going to school with like a bindi every day and calling myself like Indian American, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just like a different nuance, and like it was very much like, Hollister fashion, to put it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm just curious. Were there any people that actually did that? Like, wore traditional clothing to school, or, tried to expand beyond that Hollister, American Eagle kind of fashion?
I mean, I'm sure there was like some like nuances of it, like people who wore, I mean, not like you would wear like very fancy traditional clothing to school or anything,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I'm sure there were some people, but it's not like you saw anybody that was like excessively popular doing that. Versus if you
Mm-hmm.
go on Instagram, you see influencers doing like a mashup of like they see an American clothing, or they wear like sari blouses and they wear it as like a fashion top, and like that kind of representation just wasn't around me like at school, where I saw people doing it and like it being something rewarded instead of something shameful.
Yeah, yeah. I think I saw a very similar thing in my high school because I grew up in Asia, but
Mm-hmm.
I went to an American high school, and it was really interesting because, like, I think the Asians and the white people were really quite distinct groups in a way because although like they preached like multiculturalism and things like that, even things like beauty within the groups were very different because in the Asian group, it was very obvious that like being skinny and like having great skin and things like that were huge, like very important for their beauty standards. While for the white community, it was much different in terms of like they wanted that hourglass figure or like being
Mm-hmm.
slim thick.
Yeah, and I feel like that's honestly represented in like common trends too. Like, or even in America, I've heard of like, the whole like Asian haircuts being flattering, so they like slim down your face, or like challenges where somebody like holds up a piece of paper that's like A4 size and their waist has to be like skinnier than the paper that they hold up. And like just popular challenges like that are honestly represented in Western media too, where there's all of these like challenges where you like check how attractive you are. But yeah, that's like an interesting thing that you noted about like skinniness and skincare.
They're similar in that they're both in a way unnatural, I guess, because like for Asians, I think it's more of that, we emphasize the small, submissive, kind of trope to match the stereotype of, what
Mm.
Asian feminism is supposed to be, versus Western ideals, I think, embody more of a powerful, like, independent kind
Mm.
of image, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So like the perfect like feminine woman in Asian culture is more like I guess, obedient and like listens to her family, or like, I feel like that's also represented in Indian culture in a way, or like, you know, she's someone that is allowed to be empowered, but only like by her career. And that's only because I'm like a first gen, so that's like, education and career emphasized. But yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, it's strange because like I feel like I barely ever see empowerment for the Asian community come in the form of anything like about your physical appearance, really. You know,
I feel
we're in
like
the
it's just sort
Western.
of something that's like expected of you, but like never said clearly.
Yeah, exactly. It's not something you are taught to flaunt in a way when as like opposed to Western media where it's like, you know what, if you're a power woman, you're gonna show it. Like wear that blazer, wear those heels. Like it's a statement. But I guess like that was just never part of the culture I had growing up.
I feel like drawing attention to yourself too much is almost like an unwanted thing versus like being the center of the room is something that's like sought after in America.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I guess that's where that like kind of exotic stereotype of some races come from because it's like we're naturally told to, be less identifiable or like stand out in a room and so like there's almost that stigma that like if you are picked like you're special or like different or kind of rare, like hard to get to. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like I see what you mean. And like the other kind of elephant in the room with like beauty standards in Asia, I feel is like colorism because I feel like people do so many things. Like they really strive to be lighter with like fair and lovely. I mean, all kinds of things where being lighter gives you like more benefits and like rewards you in Asian society, like even within a particular like Asian country or like subgroup.
Yeah, and I know this is not to say that I think there are some aspects of colorism that also exists within like some Western communities and even like within the Black community. Maybe I've read some things about that, but it's especially apparent in the Asian community because like you see people go out of their way to maintain a lighter skin color. In the boiling sun, there'll be a bunch of like housewives just like dressed from head to toe, and it's not to protect you from the sun, like from UV rays, it's for keeping that fair complexion. And it's almost as if like being darker is in a way degrading.
Mm.
I don't know. Do you think there's that subconscious like reason behind why they do that?
I mean, I think people go completely out of their way to the point where like they will even use like creams with mercury or like IV treatments, because they know there's a subconscious bias like built on this construct of race that like it's undeniable if you look at the stats that like fairer people are just treated better in society, or like you see this even with like famous like celebrities and stuff like within the Black community where like a light-skinned girl is like just not
Mm-hmm.
given the same harsh criticism that like a dark-skinned girl would be. And like same with like who is acceptable in white media. Like whenever they pick somebody to be in
Mm-hmm.
a movie or like be in some kind of representation, I have literally never seen like a dark skinned Indian girl be on TV. Like it's always like a light skinned girl. Even in like Bollywood movies, they're like so fair they
Mm-hmm.
could literally be like not Indian if they, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But, or even sometimes they will pick like for the whole category of Asian, like an East Asian girl to represent. And like we saw that like in a Harry Potter movie for like Nagini, even though that comes from like Philippine and like Indian culture, like the Naga, which is like the snake. But like
Mm-hmm.
an East Asian like dragon lady played her, which is like interesting that they kind of just mesh all of our cultures together because for them it's like, oh yeah, just one Asian face. Like what's the difference? You know?
Yeah. And I guess that kind of plays more into the fact that, in a way, a lot of times when Asians are like being fetishized and things like that, they group them into one to kind of lose their like each individual loses their identity into the
Mm-hmm.
collective. But like it really doesn't work when the collective doesn't match. And like when there's that mismatch, I think that's when like expectations clash and like I don't know, like dangerous idealisms of like certain races will have like, you know, make unnecessary like expectations out of them also.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And like I would guess like how do you think like Asians are perceived in the dating pool where it's like do you think that we're seen primarily by our race and like that becomes an issue just because I guess not every part of the country is going to grow up like the Bay Area where like Asian culture is represented and you learn about it indirectly. You know,
Hmm.
so what are your thoughts about that?
I don't know. I think for a lot of people still like Asians are, you know, like a bucket list thing where they're like, okay, like getting with you will be just another tick off my bucket list and that's kind of a goal. Or like you're exotic and that's why I want you. But
I
again,
mean, honestly, like I've heard things even at USC, like in the short year that I was on
really,
campus. Yeah.
oh
I
my
mean, it was
gosh,
like strange, definitely.
I
Or like
think
sometimes I feel like people will like use you almost like as a representative of your culture or like act as if you're like their cultural tour guide or like they almost
mhm,
try and like impress you with your own culture as if that's like the only representative thing you are instead of understanding like oh yeah, you're like a whole person with like all of these characteristic traits, all of these interests. Like you can't
yeah,
just reduce everybody down to like not only their race, but like, you know, I feel like that just makes you replaceable or like it makes you feel like that's the only reason that they're like with you.
yeah. And why do you think people have the urge to do that? Like, you know, feel like they need to have some, not a trophy wife, but like some trophy friend or girlfriend, boyfriend that represents, I don't know, diversity or something.
I mean, I think it's often disguised as a preference or like it's disguised almost like a compliment, which I think is dangerous, even though fetishization is really a microaggression. And
Mm-hmm.
I think people really need to examine why they have particular preferences, whether they're only dating people of a certain like skin color or like only dating somebody that's like lighter than something or like and you know what they think that race has like you know in common or like because not every Asian is alike. So it's hard to say, yeah, every time I date an Indian girl, this is always the quality she's going to have because that's just not true. Like we aren't
Mm-hmm.
all you know, even within India, like there's so many different religions, there's so many different
Mm-hmm.
like ways you could have been brought up. So like it just kind of is hard to act as if that's like a really refining factor.
Yeah.
And I just think people need to like really examine the power structures that exist in society and understand like why. Is it like colorism? Is it like racism? But like what about your stereotype of that race is like
Mm-hmm.
making you view them as like a sexual object?
Yeah. I mean, like, for you, have you ever had any like experiences where I don't know, you felt like people were seeing you for your or like dating you for your race and not your own like personality yourself?
I mean, yeah, and I feel like when it's not overt, it's like creepy or like not creepy, but like it's a little like hard to be in that situation because you're almost like doubting in the relationship like do they really want me for me or like am I just
Hmm.
filling this like role of like an Asian
Yeah.
girl, you know? Like it's just hard and like I feel like some of the ways you can tell are like if they're more attracted to like the culture than they are to you or like they
Hmm.
that's always like what they want to talk about or like they're like, "Oh, how is this different from you?" And like I don't know, it's also like confusing because like I'm an Indian American woman. Like I'm both. Like that's a hyphenation. You know,
Hmm.
it's not like I'm Indian in America and it's not like I'm completely American. So like there's that intersection and like that's a unique identity. But I feel like when
Yeah.
people try and fetishize you, like they try and overemphasize the Asian part, you
Yeah.
know?
And the thing is like I think when they fetishize, it's like appreciating the culture is one thing, But when they fetishize you, it's specific in that everything about your culture turns into something almost sexual. Because like I've
Right.
seen like cultural symbols, like people say like the lotus flower or like
Mm.
China dolls and things like that have really nothing to do with sex in our culture just turned into something sexual. And that's not like what our culture originally meant it to be, but that's how they perceive it, you
It's
know?
just so one dimensional and like it really just boils you down to a race and like I don't know. I just think it's like hard to be like represented by that one quality when all of us are like such nuanced like people, you know?
Yeah, for sure. What makes it so much harder for me, at least, is that, at least in my family growing up, and I know a lot of my Asian friends, like this was never a topic of discussion. Like dating, sex, sexuality, or like even really identity in terms of like, oh, how you're feeling about like, who you are. Um, that was never a topic of discussion. It was really taboo to kind of bring it up.
Yeah, I really understand that. Like honestly, I feel like brown girls and like Desi girls, we are simultaneously sexualized by American society in the way that like just sexualizes all women and like Asian women, but like kind
Hmm.
of simultaneously desexualized by like within our own, community where it's like there's some kind of shame or like stigma associated with sex positivity, but also just sort of it doesn't feel like there's a lot of like literature or like it doesn't feel like there's a lot of things out there that really like describe our experience where it's like there isn't enough like media representation or like all of those things which gives people an idea about us, so we just receive all of
Yeah.
these like conflicting messages.
Yeah, and it's really confusing, especially for like adolescents and teens, like when they're in the middle of their growing pains. There's no like for your studies or something, you can go to textbooks and like Salcon or something, but like in terms of these things, that's so specific to your race, and like it's something that you often look to your parents for or like your family for, people who you really trust. Not having that, stable platform to kind of voice your opinions off and like see, navigate where you want to go in terms of like your sexuality or your dating life. Like, I think that becomes really dangerous when the alternative to that is just what, the media portrays as like what Asians have to do with sexuality. And that's a dangerous game to play.
I agree, especially because it's clear that like Asians are hypersexualized in the media to the point where like fetishization becomes easy. And like even with all of these like TV shows and tropes like 90 Day Fiance, like they have whole like episodes and things focused on white men going and basically doing like I mean, it's weird. Like they're like dating a girl that's like 20 years old that's like from an Asian country and they're like, "Oh yeah, I just want like a young Asian wife." And it's like what are people at home supposed to like see? It just feels like very like sexual imperialism. Like I don't even
Yes.
know like how to say.
Yes, that's exactly the word. And the thing is, like, this is where it gets so complex because, like, is it really wrong for the woman to, want another to move up in the income bracket if that's what's best for her and her family? Like, that's when it becomes like gray area into like, is she playing into this? Are we like also forwarding this fetishization like cycle? I guess that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, all I know is that like this hypersexualization honestly just makes it a lot easier to like I guess just disguise like aggression or like sexual misconduct because I feel like the race aspect of it is just erased. It just feels like, oh yeah, it's sexual misconduct, but she's a woman. And like they forget that the whole, you know, component of her being Asian is why a predator, maybe stereotyped her as like oh my God, vulnerable or like submissive.
Yeah. What we really need is more discussion on this within our families starting first. and then move out from there also, because I think the most dangerous thing is when we believe in that fetishization ourselves, and like, you know, young people play into that stereotype because that's what they think is reality.
But yeah, thank you so much for joining us on Beyond Boba. It was just a little boba shop vibe, a combo with our bestie, and some drinks. And our next episode will be about body image and mental health in the APITA community. Thank you so much for listening.
Hey, you've reached the end of this episode of Beyond Boba. If you are a USC student, please head over to our bit.ly link at Beyond Boba and this episode number to enter into our giveaway. Please enter within 1 week of this episode's release to be eligible. As always, let us know any thoughts you have at beyondbobapodcast@gmail.com, and we hope to see you guys for the next episode. Bye!